Guess it is what it is then, huh? Hello. Good morning. It's cold. Good morning, Renee. How's everyone doing? Morning. Rainy again in Texas. Ugh. Sorry to hear that for you. That sounds awful. Sounds truly awful. Dropping things all over the place. What's everyone drinking this morning? You got your coffee? You got your good evening? Oh, good evening. How is everyone this fine Wednesday morning? Oh, so heavy. Oh, I hate when they're new because, yeah, you always spill a little bit with it. Ugh. It's alright. I'll fix it. I'll fix it. Good morning. Been so long since I've been able to make book club. Well, hello. We just, sorry for you. It's morning. Good morning. Oh, it's not a big deal. You can say good evening. It doesn't bother me. Elizabeth, we barely just started our new book yesterday, and we're only one chapter into it, so you really haven't missed much. It's a good time to pop back in. It's a good time to pop back in. Hey, Shelly. Hey, Shira. Oh my. It's too early for that. It's way too early for that. Today should be fun. Ugh. Morning, drying my hair and having a phone interview in 20 minutes. Hey, that's awesome. Hey, Amanda. You've been catching up on YouTube. Oh, nice. Excellent. Good morning. Amanda, I know I didn't get to your Roll for Slime last night. I just realized trying to do the thing with John and do Roll for Slime at the same time was making it not go like as efficiently, you know? So, I was like, you know what, I'm only just going to do the one, and then today I'll do the rest of them when it's just us, because it's just easier to do Roll for Slime when we're not, like, talking about the book in between. I hope everybody understood that was the reasoning. Yeah, it was just, like, Roll for Slime is totally awesome. It was, like, this weird back and forth where, like, we were trying to ask John questions, and we were trying to get him to, like, it was just too much. I was like, you know what, we probably should have just done one thing, which is fine. He was a great sport. It was definitely, yeah, it was too much for my brain too. But I think I'll do a lot more Roll for Slimes today, because I've got 10 more to do. 10 more Roll for Slimes to do. You know, I'm not hungry yet. I'm not gonna. So yeah, Shelly, what kind of what's the interview for? Anything good? Which one do you want? We won't complain about 2 lives. Yeah, no. We're definitely going to do one later. I don't know what time. I missed it. I really enjoyed that book. There'll be another one. He's going to come on with us when we finish the second book. So don't worry about it, Tiffany. You won't be missing it permanently. He's going to come on again. Do not fret. Oh, I did it without the awful sound today. That was good. Okay. Zoe has rearranged my living room again, which means my footstool is way over there. Come on. Come over here, footstool. Okay, footstool has been retrieved. I'm having my coffee in my new Beetlejuice mug I got from the musical. Hey, that's Awesome. We're twins, sort of. Different versions, but still. Is anyone going to be around this afternoon? I have to make slime this afternoon, whether it's for restock or for roll for slime, but I was figuring if any of the roll for slime people were around this afternoon, I might do an afternoon live for roll for slime. If not, I'll just make slime for the restock this afternoon and do roll for slime tonight. It doesn't really matter to me. I have to take Zoe to dance class first, and then I can make slime. You guys should see the slime room. I'm so happy. Like, I saw something that was like, you know, this is the last full moon. Wednesday today is the last full or new moon or full moon. I can't remember. Before the well, I'll be going to the PO box later, Shara. Before the eclipse, and like you should clear out any blockages and things in your life. And like if there's that one room in your house that's been too cluttered and you've been meaning to clean it out, now's the time to do it. And yesterday I was like, dang it, it's the slime room. It's just too much. And so I just completely cleared it. Catherine came over yesterday and she was like, I don't even recognize this room. So it's going to be really like peaceful to make slime in there now, because it's going to be more like the downstairs is, where it's like, there's nothing in here. So that's kind of nice. I always feel like, when I'm in there because there's too much stuff. You got me to 1,000 likes. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So anyway, if anyone's around this afternoon, I won't do any of the roll for slimes live. Like, this is what I will do. I will say the person's name, and if they're there, I'll do theirs. And if they're not there, I won't do theirs. You know what I mean? Thank you. So anyway, we are reading Land of Stories. We just barely started it yesterday. We are only one chapter in. So far, so good. It's been really, really good so far, and I'm really excited for us to get into it a little bit more. And I hope you all are excited too. Well, even after all the stuff for restock came in, Tiffany, that's still in the garage. I'm not even going to lie about it. I have not brought that box upstairs. I basically intend to cut that box open and bring it up in pieces as I need it. After I see my sister today, I should have a better idea of when I'll be going out this summer. That makes sense. When does she come out? Is she coming out soon for her big move? I think, you know, that box is just too big. And because I do have a slime room, because the supplies are all going to be used. Yes, I can summarize it really quickly in just 1 second. Because these supplies are all going to be used in this restock, it's not like they're going to be in the room long term, you know? Yes, Justina had a great question, which is, can you summarize what happened in the first chapter briefly? And I absolutely can. Basically, in the first chapter, we find out that there are, oh my God, 3 days till Disney. Very excited for you. There are these two twins, and their names are Alex and Connor. And Alex and Connor know a lot about fairy tales because they spend a lot of time with their family, their grandmother and their father, being told stories and stuff like that. Alex is a really good student. She's very attentive. Connor, her twin brother, falls asleep in class, but he still knows the stuff. But apparently something really difficult has been going on in their life recently. We don't know what it is, but obviously I assume we're going to find out. Thank you so much, Jaden. I appreciate it. And you too. Definitely lots of Disney stuff. We love that. I need to go to Disneyland. I really do. I haven't used my pass in about a month and it feels really shameful. Although I'm going to make a special trip there if I end up getting the kitten to go buy that Marie stuff. But anyway, I got more pictures of the kitten last night. Oh my gosh, I really hope. I don't know if you heard, but yeah, I did. I'm a pass holder, so and I live 20 minutes from Disneyland. So as far as going to Disneyland goes, it's just about making a reservation and driving over there. There's nothing more to it than that. You have a 1-year-old? Oh my gosh, that's amazing and so difficult. But yeah, as far as Disneyland goes, I kind of just make a reservation whenever I feel like it and pop over there. Sometimes I just go for a snack. Sometimes I go with friends. Sometimes whatever. But that's, you know, the whole situation. I just haven't used my pass in a while. Can I thank you for pronouncing my name correctly? Yes, of course, and I do my best. If ever anyone's name isn't pronounced correctly, feel free to correct me. I don't take offense to being corrected on someone's name. Oh yeah, I get that, but let me know about Disney World or the cruises. Oh yeah, I'm definitely not going to be able to do a cruise for over a year probably, and all of my Disney World trips currently are already booked because I book them around the Disney races usually, so my next one won't be until I book the next race, but I will let you know if what goes on with all of that. I'm hoping that my next race, I have enough points back to my DBC to just do that, but we'll see what happens. We shall see. All right, so let us read chapter 2. Oh, you have a 1-year-old orange tabby, not a 1-year-old child. Ah, yes, that makes sense. Okay, great. So let's read chapter 2. The longer walk home. I'm so excited about this lesson, Alex told Connor as they walked home from school. This was something Connor was used to hearing his sister declare, and it was usually his cue to stop listening. Mrs. Peters made a very good point, you know, Alex continued excitedly, speaking a mile a minute. Think about everything children miss out on when they're deprived of fairy tales. Oh, how terrible for them. Don't you just feel awful for them? Connor, are you listening to me? Yup. Connor lied. His attention was focused on an abandoned snail shell he was kicking along the sidewalk. Can you imagine a childhood without knowing all those characters and places? Alex continued. We're so fortunate that Dad and Grandma made such a point of reading them to us when we were little. Very lucky, Connor nodded, although he wasn't exactly sure what he was agreeing with. Every day after school, the Bailey twins would walk home together. They lived in a charming neighborhood that was surrounded by more charming neighborhoods that surrounded by another series of charming neighborhoods. It was a sea of suburbia, where each house was similar to the next, but uniquely different at the same time. To pass the time as they walked, Alex would tell her brother everything on her mind, all her current thoughts and concerns, a summary of everything that she had learned that day and what she planned to do as they got home. As much as this daily routine annoyed Connor, he knew he was the only person in the world that Alex had to talk to, so he tried his best to listen. But listening had never been Connor's forte. How am I ever going to decide which story to write about? It's just too difficult to choose, Alex said, clapping her hands with excitement. Which are you going to write your paper on? Connor said, whipping his head from looking at the ground. He had to mentally rewind the conversation to remember what the question was. The Boy Who Cried Wolf, he said, choosing the first fairy tale that came to mind. You can't choose that one, Alex said, shaking her head. That's the most obvious one. You have to select something more challenging to impress Mrs. Peters. You should pick, something with a hidden message deeper inside it, one that isn't so on the surface. Connor sighed. It was just easier to go along with Alex instead of arguing with her, but sometimes it was unavoidable. Fine. I'll pick Sleeping Beauty, he decided. Interesting selection, Alex said, intrigued. What do you suppose the moral of that story is? Don't piss off your neighbors, I guess, Connor said. Alex grunted disapprovingly. Be serious, Connor. That is not the moral of Sleeping Beauty, she reprimanded. Sure it is, Connor explained. If the king and the queen had just invited that crazy enchantress to their daughter's party in the first place, none of that stuff ever would have happened. They could have stopped it from happening, said Alex. That enchantress was evil and probably would have cursed the baby princess anyway. Sleeping Beauty is about trying to prevent the unpreventable. Her parents tried protecting her and all the spinning wheels in the kingdom were destroyed. She was so sheltered that she didn't even know what the danger was in the first place, and she still pricked her finger on the first spindle she ever saw. Alex might be too much, but Alex is me. Alex is me. I am Alex. I don't know who you all think you are, but I'm Alex. No question. Connor thought about this possibility and shook his head. He liked his version much better. I disagree, Connor told her. I've seen how you get upset when people don't invite you places, and you usually look like you would curse a baby too. Alex gave Connor a dirty look that Mrs. Peters would have been proud of. Well, there's no such thing as a wrong interpretation. I have to say that's definitely a misread, Alex said. I'm just saying to be careful who you ignore, Connor clarified. I always thought about Sleeping Beauty's parents that they had it coming. Oh? Alex questioned him. And I suppose you thought Hansel and Gretel had it coming too? Yeah, Connor said, feeling clever. And so did the witch. How so? Alex asked. Because, Connor explained with a smirk on his face, if you're going to live in a house made of candy, don't move next door to a couple of obese kids. A lot of these fairy tale characters are missing common sense. Alex let out another disapproving grunt. Connor figured that he would get at least 50 more out of her before they got home. The witch didn't live next door. She lived deep in the forest. They had to leave a trail of breadcrumbs behind so they could find their way back, remember? And the whole point of the house was to lure the kids in. They were starving, Alex reminded him. At least have all the facts straight before you criticize. If they were starving, what were they doing wasting breadcrumbs? Connor asked. Sounds like a couple of troublemakers to me. Alex grunted again. And in your deranged mind, what do you think the lesson of Goldilocks and the Three Bears is? Alex challenged him. Easy, Connor said. Lock your doors. Robbers come in all shapes and sizes. Even curly-haired little girls can't be trusted. Alex grunted again and crossed her arms. She tried best not to giggle. She didn't want to validate her brother's opinion. Goldilocks is about consequences. Mrs. Peters said so herself, Alex said, although Alex would never admit it. Sometimes arguing with her brother was amusing. What do you suppose Jack and the Beanstalk is about? She asked. Connor contemplated a moment and then slyly grinned. Bad beans can cause more than indigestion, he answered, laughing hysterically to himself. Alex pursed her lips and tried to hide a smile. What do you think the lesson of Little Red Riding Hood is? She asked him. Do you think that she should have just mailed her grandmother the gift basket? Now you're thinking, he said, although I've always felt a little sorry for Little Red Riding Hood. It's obvious her parents didn't like her very much. Why do you say that? Alex asked, wondering how he could have possibly constructed that from the story. Who sends their young daughter into a dark and wolf-occupied forest, carrying freshly baked food and wearing a bright-colored jacket? Connor asked. They were practically asking for a wolf to eat her. She must have annoyed the heck out of them. Alex held back laughter with all her might, but to Connor's delight, she let a quiet chuckle slip. I know you secretly agree with me, Connor said, bumping her shoulder with his. Connor, it's people like you who ruin fairy tales for the rest of the world, Alex said, forcing the smile on her face to fade. People make jokes about them, and then suddenly the whole message is lost. Alex suddenly stopped walking. All the color in her face slowly drained away. Something across the street had caught her eye, something very disappointing. What's the matter? Connor asked, turning back to her. Alex was staring at a large house. It was a lovely home, painted blue with white trim, and it had several windows. The front yard was landscaped to perfection, and it had just the right amount of grass, patches of colorful flowers, and a large oak tree ideal for climbing. If a house could smile, this house would be grinning from ear to ear. Look, Alex said, and pointed to a for sale sign next to the oak tree. A bright red strip with the word sold had been recently added to it. It's sold, Alex said, shaking her head from side to side in disbelief. It's sold, she repeated, not wanting it to be true. The little color in Connor's face drained, too. The twins stared at the house for a moment in silence, each not knowing what to say to one another. We both knew it would happen eventually, Connor said. Then why do I feel so surprised? Alex asked softly. I guess it had been for sale for so long. I just figured, it might be waiting for us. Connor saw tears begin to form in his sister's eyes, tears forming in his own. Come on, Alex, Connor said, kept walking. Let's go home. She looked at the house for a second more and then followed him. This house was the only thing the Bailey family had recently lost. This house was only one thing that the Bailey family had recently lost. A year ago, just days before their 11th birthday, Alex and Connor's father had died in a car accident on his way home from work. Mr. Bailey had owned a bookstore a few streets away named Bailey Books, and it had all been taken, and all it had taken was a few small streets for a big accident to happen. The twins and their mother had been anxiously waiting for him at the dinner table when they got the phone call telling them that their father wouldn't be joining them that night or any other night. He had never been late to dinner before, so as soon as the telephone rang, they all had known something was wrong. Alex and Connor could never forget the look on their mother's face when she answered the phone, a look that told them, without saying a word, that their lives would never be the same, that they had never seen their mother cry like she did that night. Everything happened so fast after that. It was hard for the twins to remember what order it all happened in. They remembered their mother making tons of phone calls and having to deal with a lot of paperwork. They remembered that their grandmother came to take care of them while their mother made all the funeral arrangements. They remember holding their mother's hand as they walked down the church aisle at the funeral. They remembered the white flowers and the candles and the sad expressions on everyone's faces as they passed. They remembered all the food people sent. They remembered how sorry people told them they were. They didn't remember their 11th birthday, because no one did. The twins remembered how strong Grandma and Mom had stayed for them in the following months. They remembered their mother explaining to them why they had to sell the bookstore. They remembered that eventually their mother couldn't afford their beautiful blue house anymore and that they'd have to move into a rental house a little way down the street. They remembered Grandma leaving them once they were settled into their newer, smaller house. They remembered returning to school and how falsely normal everything appeared to be. But most of all, the twins remembered not understanding why any of it had to happen. A full year had passed and the twins still didn't understand it. People had told them it would get easier with time, but how much time were they talking about? The loss seemed to grow deeper each day without their dad. They missed him so much that sometimes they expected their sadness to well out of their bodies. They missed his smile. They missed his laugh. They missed his stories. Whenever Alex had a particularly bad day at school, the first thing she would do when she got home was jump on her bike and pedal to her dad's store. She would run through the front doors and find her dad and say, "Daddy, I need to talk to you." It didn't matter if he was helping a customer or putting away brand new books on shelves. Mr. Bailey would always stop what he was doing and take his daughter to the storage room in the back and listen to what had happened. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" he would ask with big, concerned eyes. "I had a really bad day today, Daddy," Alex would say on one occasion. "Are the other kids still teasing you?" he asked. "I can call the school and ask your teacher to have a talk with them." "That wouldn't solve anything," Alex said through sniffles. "By publicly persecuting me, they're filling an insecure void caused by social and domestic neglect." Mr. Bailey scratched his head. "So what you're saying, sweetheart, is that they're just jealous?" he asked her. "Exactly," Alex said. "I read a psychology book in the library today at lunch that explained it." Mr. Bailey let out a proud laugh. His daughter's intelligence constantly amazed him. "I think you're just too bright for your own good, Alex," he said. "Sometimes I wish I was like everyone else," Alex confessed. "I'm tired of being lonely, Daddy. If being smart and being a good student means that I'll never have friends, then I wish I was more like Connor." "Alex, have I ever told you the story about the curvy tree?" Mr. Bailey asked. "No," Alex answered. Mr. Bailey's eyes lit up. They always did when he was about to tell a story. "Well," he started, "one day when I was very young, I was walking around the woods and I saw something very peculiar. It was an evergreen tree, but it was different from any other evergreen tree I had ever seen. Instead of growing straight out of the ground, its trunk curved and wound around in circles like a large vine." "How?" Alex asked, utterly entranced. "That is impossible. Evergreens don't grow like that." "Perhaps someone forgot to tell that tree," Mr. Bailey said. "Anyway, one day the logger came and cut down every single tree in the area except for the curvy tree." "Why?" Alex asked. "Because they figured it was unusable," Mr. Bailey answered. "You could never make a table or a chair or a cabinet out of it. You see, the curvy tree may have felt different from the other trees, but its uniqueness is what saved it." "Whatever happened to the curvy tree?" Alex asked. "It's still there today," Mr. Bailey said with a smile. "It's growing taller and taller and curvier every day." A tiny smile grew on Alex's face. "I think I get what you're trying to tell me, Daddy," she said. "I'm glad," Mr. Bailey said. "Now all you have to do is wait for those loggers to come and chop down all your peers." Alex laughed for the first time all day, and Mr. Bailey always knew how to cheer her up. It took the twins twice as long to walk home since they'd moved into the rental house. It was a boring home with brown walls and a flat roof. Windows were few, and the front yard consisted of plain grass lawn that was barely alive because the sprinklers didn't work. The Baileys' home was cozy but cluttered. They had more furniture than they had room for, and none of it matched the house because it was never intended to. Even though they'd lived here for more than half a year, unpacked boxes still lined up against the walls. None of them wanted to unpack them. None of them wanted to admit that they were staying as long as they actually were. The twins immediately went upstairs into their separate bedrooms. Alex sat at her desk and started her homework. Connor lay on his bed and started a nap. Alex's bedroom could have been mistaken for a library if it weren't for the bright yellow bed tucked away in the corner. Bookshelves of all heights and widths lined the room, holding everything from chapter books to encyclopedias. Connor's bedroom was more like a cave, in which he appropriately hibernated whenever he could. It was dark and messy. Patches of carpet could be seen in between piles of dirty clothes. A half-eaten grilled cheese sandwich rested on the floor and had been there for far too long for anyone's peace of mind. An hour or so later, the twins heard a sound that meant their mother was visiting from work, and they went downstairs to join her in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table while on the phone, flipping through stacks of envelopes that she had collected from the mailbox. Charlotte Bailey was a very pretty woman with red hair and freckled skin that the twins had undoubtedly inherited from her. She had a huge, caring heart and loved her kids more than anything else in the world. Unfortunately, they hardly ever saw their mother anymore. She was a nurse at the local children's hospital and was forced to work constant double shifts to support the family since her husband had passed away. Mrs. Bailey was already gone before the twins woke up every morning and would get home after the twins had gone to sleep. The only time she had with the twins anymore was a brief lunch and dinner break that she spent at home. Mrs. Bailey loved her job, and she loved taking care of children at the hospital, but she hated that it took time away from her own children. In a way, the twins felt that they had lost both of their parents after their father's death. "Hi, guys," Mrs. Bailey said to the twins, covering the receiving end of the phone. "Did you have a good day at school?" Alex nodded positively. Connor gave her an over-enthusiastic thumbs up. "Yes, I can work a double this Monday," she said into the phone, speaking with someone from the hospital. No problem," she lied. Most of the envelopes she was looking at had bright red warning stickers with "Final Notice" or "Payment Due" on them. Even working the hours that she worked, Mrs. Bailey had to get creative with money sometimes. She put the envelopes face down on the table, hiding them from the twins. "Thank you," Mrs. Bailey said into the phone, and she clicked it off, turning to her children. "How are you guys?" "Good," they both said passively. The Baileys' mom tuition turned on. She knew something was troubling them. "What's the matter?" she asked, studying their faces. "You seem a little down." Alex and Connor looked at each other, unsure of what to say. Did their mother know about their old house? Should they tell her? "Come on," their mother said. "What is it? You know you can tell me anything." "We aren't upset," Connor said. "We knew it was going to happen eventually." "What?" Mrs. Bailey asked. "The house sold," Alex said. "We saw it today on our way home from school." There was a moment before anyone said anything. This wasn't news to Mrs. Bailey, but the twins could tell she was just as disappointed about that as they were, and hoped that they wouldn't notice. "Oh, that," Mrs. Bailey said, brushing it off. "Yes, I know. You shouldn't be sad about it, though. We'll find a bigger and better house as soon as we catch up on things here." And that was that. Mrs. Bailey wasn't a good liar, and neither were the twins. Still, Alex and Connor smiled, nodding along with her. "What did you learn in school today?" their mother asked. "So much," Alex proclaimed with a huge smile. "Not much," Connor mumbled with a scowl. "That's because you fell asleep in class again," Alex tattled. Connor gave Alex a dirty look. "Oh, Connor, not again," Mrs. Bailey said, shaking her head. "What are we going to do with you?" "It's not my fault," Connor said. "Mrs. Peters' lessons just put me to sleep. It just happens. It's like my brain switches off or something. See, even my old rubber band trick doesn't work." "Rubber band trick?" Mrs. Bailey asked. "I wear a rubber band around my wrist and snap it every time I get sleepy," Connor explained, "and I was positive it was foolproof." Mrs. Bailey shook her head, more amused than anything. "Well, don't forget how lucky you are to be in that classroom," Mrs. Bailey said with a guilt-inducing mom look. "All the kids at the hospital would like nothing more than to trade places with you and go to school every day." They'd change their mind if they met Mrs. Peters, Connor said under his breath. The phone rang just as Mrs. Bailey was about to continue scolding her son. Hello, Mrs. Bailey said, answering the phone. The worry lines on her forehead became very prominent. Tomorrow? No, there must be a mistake. I told them that I couldn't work at all tomorrow. It's the twins' 12th birthday, and I was planning on spending the evening with them. Alex and Connor looked at each other with the same surprised expression. They'd almost forgotten they were turning 12 the next day. Almost. Are you positive there's no one else who can cover it? Mrs. Bailey asked, her voice more desperate than she wanted it to sound. No. I understand. Yes, of course. I'm aware of the staff cuts. Yes, I'll see you tomorrow. Mrs. Bailey hung up the phone, closed her eyes, and let out a deep, disappointed sigh. I've got some bad news, guys, she told them. It looks like I have to work tomorrow night, so I won't be here for your birthday. But I'll make it up to you. We'll celebrate when I get home from work the next night, all right? That's fine, Mom, Alex said cheerfully, trying to make her feel better. We understand. It's okay, Connor added. We weren't really expecting anything special anyway. The situation made Mrs. Bailey feel worse, like the worst mother in the world, and their understanding made her feel even worse. She would have much rather watched them throw a fit or get angry or show any emotion appropriate for their age. They were too young to be used to this kind of disappointment. Oh, Mrs. Bailey said, fighting back sadness inside her. Great, then we'll just have dinner, and I'll get a cake, and we'll have a nice night. Now, I'm going to go upstairs for a minute before I head back to work. She left the kitchen and hurried up the stairs and into her bedroom. The twins waited a beat before climbing the stairs to check on her. They peered into their mother's bedroom, and she was sitting on her bed crying, rolled up balls of tissues in both hands, talking to a framed photo of her late husband. Oh, John, Mrs. Bailey said, I try to stay strong and keep our family going, but it's really hard to do without you. They're such good kids, and they don't deserve this. She quickly dried her tears once she felt the twins watching her. Alex and Connor slowly walked into her room and sat on either side of her. I'm so sorry for everything, Mrs. Bailey said to them. It just isn't fair that you've had to go through all of this at such a young age. It's going to be okay, Mom, Alex said. We don't need anything special for our birthday. Birthdays are overrated anyway, Connor added, but we know things are tight right now. Mrs. Bailey put her arms around them. When did you two become so grown up? She asked with watery eyes. I'm the luckiest mom in the world. And their eyes fell on the photo of Mr. Bailey. You know what Dad would say if he were here? Mrs. Bailey asked the twins. He'd say, right now, we're living in an ugly chapter of our lives, but books always get better. The twins smiled at her, hoping this was true. Sad. That's really sad. Are we going to be okay? I don't know if we're going to be okay. All right, who's an Alex and who's a Connor? Who's Alex and who's Connor in this group before we continue? How many pages are in the next chapter? These are long chapters. Does anyone know what time it is? I forgot to put on my watch. Yeah, it's a great book. This is a really well-written book. I'm incredibly impressed with Chris. 7:42. Do we want to do one more chapter? I think I have time for just one more before I have to take Zoe to dance. Do you guys want to do one more? You're probably more like Connor. You're more like Alex. I am definitely Alex, but I think I have Connor's snark. I think I'm Alex with Connor's snark. Yeah. Do we want to do one more chapter? And here's my Renee bookmark, just for, you know. Yeah, one more. You guys have time for one more? I think I have time for one more. These are long chapters for a kid's book, I have to say. This is definitely like in the older kids' age range. One more. Good one, Abby. Oh, one more. I think I'm going to keep this for Zoe when she's older. I think that she's really going to love this when she's a big girl. All right, chapter 3, a birthday surprise. Pencils down, Mrs. Peters ordered from the front of the classroom. Her students were taking a math test, and she had been watching them like a prison guard the entire time. Pass your tests to the front. Connor looked down at the test as if it were written in ancient hieroglyphics. Most of his answers were blank, and he had just scribbled around the others to make it look like he had tried. He said a little prayer to himself and passed the test forward with the others. Hey, Addie, how you doing? Yes, Ursula bookmark. You can get the bookmarks like this one. Renee makes these. Renee, who's in this group, she made this for me. So you can get these from Renee. I don't know what all characters she has right now, but this is the one that she sent me. It came with my cups. He said a little prayer to himself and passed the test forward with the others. The tests were all passed to Alex, who stacked them in a neat pile for Mrs. Peters. She always felt so refreshed after taking a test, especially one as simple as the one that they had just been taken. Her brother's test caught her eye since it was one with the least amount of writing on it. Alex knew that Connor always tried his best at school, but he never seemed to be good enough. You're good, you're wishing it was Friday? I hear that. She looked back at him, wishing she could help him, and then it occurred to her. Maybe she could help him. Alex looked up at Mrs. Peters and saw that she was busy looking at the notes on her lesson plan. Would her teacher notice if Alex quickly filled in a couple of answers for her brother? Was Alex even capable of doing something so blatantly wrong? Was it considered cheating if you were doing it on someone else's test? Would the gracious gesture cancel out the offense in the grand scheme of things? Alex was prone to overthinking everything, so she just did it. She quickly filled in some of her brother's answers, making her handwriting slightly sloppier than it usually was, and handing the thick stack of tests to Mrs. Peters. It was the most spontaneous thing that she had ever done. Thank you, Miss Bailey, Mrs. Peters said, making eye contact with Alex. Alex felt like a pit of her stomach had fallen out of her body. The excitement that she felt from her impulse was now overshadowed by guilt. Mrs. Peters had always trusted her. How could she do something so juvenile? Should she confess what she had done? What was the punishment for this kind of crime? Would she feel this guilty for the rest of her life? She looked back at her brother. Connor let out a long, quiet sigh, and Alex sensed her brother's sadness and embarrassment. She could feel his hopelessness as if it were her own. The critical wheels in Alex's head stopped turning. She knows she had done the right thing, not as a student, but as a sister. I want you all to get out your homework from last night, Mrs. Peters commanded, and I would like you to briefly present your work in front of the class. The teacher regularly surprised this class with an impromptu presentation like this one to keep them on their toes. She took a seat at the stool at the back of the classroom, uncomfortably close to Connor's seat so she could keep an eye on his consciousness. One by one, the students presented their assignments to the class. Besides a boy who thought Jack and the Beanstalk was about alien abduction and a girl who presented that Puss in Boots was an early example of animal cruelty, all the other students seemed to have interpreted the tales correctly. It was so hard to choose just one fairy tale to write about, Alex said as she animatedly presented her 7-page paper to the class, so I selected the story, the theme of which is present in virtually every fairy tale and every story ever written. Cinderella! Her excitement was not shared by her peers. Many people have issues with Cinderella, saying that it has anti-feminist elements, Alex continued, but I think that's completely ridiculous. Cinderella is not about a man saving a woman, it's about karma. Most of the class began daydreaming about other things. Mrs. Peters was the only person in the room who seemed to give any slight interest in what Alex had to say. Think about it, Alex went on. Even after years of constant abuse from her stepmother and her stepsisters, Cinderella remained a good person with high hopes. She never stopped believing in herself, in the good of the world, and although she did marry a prince in the end, Cinderella always had inner happiness. Her story shows that even in the worst of situations, even when it seems no one in the world appreciates you, even as long as you have hope, everything can get better. Alex let her mind linger on what she had said. She questioned the last point that she made in her presentation. Was that really what Cinderella was about, or was it what she needed Cinderella to be about? Thank you, Miss Bailey. Very well said, Mrs. Peters said, with the closest thing to a smile on her face that she was capable of making. Thank you for your time. Alex said, and she nodded to the class. It's your turn, Mr. Bailey, the teacher announced. She was sitting so close to him that she could feel a warm breath from her nostrils on the back of his neck. Mr. Connor went to the front of the classroom, dragging his feet, as if they were encased in concrete. He had never had trouble talking in front of the class, but he'd rather be anywhere in the world than presenting something in front of a teacher. Alex gave him an encouraging nod. I chose the boy who cried wolf, Connor said, going against his sister's advice from the day before. Alex slumped in her seat and Mrs. Peters rolled her eyes. This was very disappointing. I know what you're all thinking, that I went with the easiest one, Connor said, except reading it again, I don't think that the story is about the importance of honesty. I think it's about high expectations. Alex and Mrs. Peters both raised an eyebrow. Where was he going with this? Sure, the boy was a brat. I can't deny that, Connor continued, gesturing to the half-page paper he'd written. But can you blame him for having a little fun? Clearly his village was having a bit of a wolf problem, and everyone was stressed out about it. He was just a kid. Did they really expect him to be perfect all the time? His presentation may not have been the best, but it certainly was catching the class's attention. And it makes me wonder why no one was watching this kid, Connor added. Maybe if his parents had kept an eye on him, he wouldn't have been eaten. I think that the story is trying to tell us to keep an eye on our kids, especially if they're pathological liars. Thank you. Connor never tried to be funny. He was just painfully honest about his thoughts and opinions. This honesty always amused his classmates, but never his teacher. Thank you, Mr. Bailey, Mrs. Peters said sharply. You may sit down now. Connor knew he'd blown it. He took his seat, resuming his position under the teacher's cold stare and warm breath. Why did he even bother trying anymore? It wasn't the end of the school day unless Connor felt completely worthless. There was only one person who was capable of making him feel the way that he did, better than this when he felt this way. Connor only wished he was still around. Mr. Bailey always knew when his son needed to talk to him. It didn't have anything to do with observation or intuition, but with location. Occasionally, Mr. Bailey would get home from work and find his son sitting up in the oak tree in the front yard with a contemplative look on his face. Connor, Mr. Bailey would ask, approaching the tree. Is everything okay, bud? Uh-huh, Connor would mumble. Are you sure? Mr. Bailey would ask. Yep, Connor would say unconvincingly. He wasn't as vocal about his troubles as his sister was, but you could see it in his face. Mr. Bailey would climb up the tree and have a seat on the branch next to his son and coax out what was troubling him. Are you sure you don't want to talk about it? Mr. Bailey would continue. Did something happen at school today? Connor would nod his head. I got a bad grade on a test, he admitted on one occasion. Did you study for it? His father asked. Yes, Connor said. I studied really hard, Dad, but it's just no use. I'll never be as smart as Alex. His cheeks turned bright red with embarrassment. Connor, let me fill you in on something that took me a long time to learn, Mr. Bailey said. The women in your life are always going to seem smarter. It's just the way it is. I've been married to your mother for 13 years, and I still have trouble keeping up with her. You just can't compare yourself to others. But I'm stupid, Dad, Connor said, his eyes filling with tears. I find that hard to believe, Mr. Bailey said. It takes intelligence to be funny and tell a good joke, and you're the funniest kid I know. Humor doesn't help with history or math, Connor said. It doesn't matter how hard I try in school, I'm always going to be the dumb kid in class. Connor's face went white and expressionless. He stared off into nothing, so ashamed of himself that it hurt. Luckily for him, Mr. Bailey had an encouraging story for every situation. Connor, have I ever told you the legend about the walking fish? Mr. Bailey asked him. He looked up at his father. The walking fish? Connor asked. Dad, no offense, but I don't think one of your stories is going to make me feel better this time. All right, suit yourself, Mr. Bailey said. A few moments passed, and Connor's curiosity got the best of him. Okay, you can tell me about the walking fish, Connor said. Mr. Bailey's eyes lit up as they always did just before he was about to tell a story. Connor could tell this was going to be a good one. Once upon a time, there was a large fish who lived in a lake by himself. Mr. Bailey told him. Every day the fish would watch longingly as a boy from the village nearby would play with the horses and dogs and squirrels on land. Is a dog going to die in this story, Dad? Connor interrupted. You know I hate stories where dogs die. Let me finish, Mr. Bailey went on. One day, a fairy came to the lake and granted the fish a wish. That's random, Connor said. Why do fairies always just show up and do nice things for people that they don't know? Employment obligation? Mr. Bailey shrugged. But for argument's sake, let's just say that she dropped her wand in the lake and the fish retrieved it. So she offered him a wish as a thank you. Happy? That's better, Connor said. Go on. The fish, predictably, wished for legs so he could play with the boy from the village, Mr. Bailey said. So the fairy turned his fin into legs and he became the walking fish. That's weird, Connor said. Let me guess. The fish was so freaky looking that the boy never wanted to play with him. Nope. They became great friends and they played together with the other animals on land, Mr. Bailey told him. But one day, the boy fell into the lake and he couldn't swim. The walking fish tried to save him, but it was no use. He didn't have fins anymore. Sadly, the boy drowned. Connor's mouth hung open like a broken glove compartment. You see, if the fish had stayed in the lake and not wished to be something else, he could have saved the boy's life, Mr. Bailey finished. Dad, that's a horrible story, he said. How does a boy live by a lake and not know how to swim? Dogs can swim. Couldn't one of them have saved him? Where was the fairy when the boy was drowning? I think you're missing the point of the story, Mr. Bailey said. Sometimes we forget about our own advantages because we focus on what we don't have. Just because you have to work a little harder at something that seems easier to others doesn't mean that you're without your own talents. Connor thought about this for a moment. I think I get it, Dad, he said. Mr. Bailey smiled at him. Now, why don't we get down from this tree and I help you study for your next test? I told you, studying doesn't help, Connor said. I've tried and tried and tried, and it never helps. Then we'll come up with our own way of studying, Mr. Bailey told him. We'll look at pictures of people in your history books and make up jokes about them so you remember their names. And we'll create funny scenarios to help you with those math formulas. Connor slowly but surely nodded and agreed to it. Fine, he said with a half smile. But for future reference, I like your story about the curvy tree much better. The walk home that day was very quiet. Alex could sense that her brother's presentation had left him a little tense. She tried breaking the silence every few steps with a supportive comment, or at least she thought that they were supportive. I thought you made a good point, she said sweetly. Granted, it's not a point I ever would have made. Thanks, Connor replied. She wasn't helping. You may have overanalyzed it, though, Alex said. I do it all the time. Sometimes I read a story and I interpret it the way that I want to rather than the way that the author wanted to. It just takes practice. He didn't respond. She still wasn't helping. Well, it's our birthday today, Alex reminded him. Are you excited to be 12? Not really, Connor admitted. It just feels like 11. But aren't we supposed to be getting a new set of molars soon or something? Come on, let's be positive, Alex insisted. Even though we aren't doing anything exciting for our birthdays, we should stay optimistic. There are plenty of things to look forward to. One more year till we'll be teenagers. I suppose, Connor said. Only 4 more years until we can drive. And 6 years until we can vote and go to college, Alex added. That was all that they could come up with. Their cheerfulness was hollow and they both knew it, so they just stayed silent for the remainder of the walk. Even if they had had the most extravagant party in the world waiting for them at home, birthdays were always going to be hard for them. School had been predictable. The walk home had been typical. The whole day had seemed normal. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary to make their birthday feel special at all until they got home and saw a bright blue car pull into the driveway. Grandma? The twins said in perfect unison. Surprise! Their grandmother yelled, getting out of her car. She was so loud that the entire neighborhood could hear her. The twins ran up to her with huge smiles on their faces. They only saw their grandmother a couple of times a year, and they were stunned to see her in the driveway with no prior warning. Their grandmother hugged both of them so tightly that they thought they'd pop. Look at you two, she said. You look like you've both grown a foot since the last time I saw you. Their grandmother was a petite woman with long gray-brown hair that was pulled back into a tight braid. She had the warmest smile and the kindest eyes in the world, which wrinkled pleasantly when she smiled, just like the twins' dad had. She was cheerful and energetic and exactly what the twins needed. She always wore bright dresses and her signature shoes with white laces and brown heels. She was never more than a few feet from her large green travel bag and blue purse. And although their grandfather had died many years before, she still always wore her wedding ring. "We had no idea you were coming," Connor said. "It wouldn't have been a surprise if you knew I was coming," Grandma said. "What are you doing here, Grandma?" Alex asked. "Your mom called and asked me to stay with you for a while she went to work," Grandma told them. "I couldn't let you spend your birthday alone, could I? Thank goodness I was in the country." Their grandmother was retired and spent most of the year traveling around the world with her other retired friends. They traveled mostly to third world countries and read to sick children in hospitals and taught other children of the community to read and write. "Come, help me with the groceries," Grandma told the twins. She opened her trunk and began to unload the bags filled with food into the house. It was enough food to last them for weeks. Mrs. Bailey was sitting at the kitchen table going through another stack of mail with bright red warning labels on them. She pushed them aside quickly when the twins were in sight, and their grandmother paraded into the kitchen with the groceries. "What's all this?" Mrs. Bailey asked. "Hello, dear," Grandma said to her. "I'm planning on cooking the twins a huge birthday dinner, and I wasn't sure what you had in the house, so I just went to the store and picked up a couple of things." Their grandmother always had a talent for sugarcoating the truth. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," Mrs. Bailey said, shaking her head, unprepared for the gesture of kindness. "It wasn't any trouble at all," Grandma said with a small but reassuring smile. "Alex, Connor, how about you go get your birthday presents from the front seat of the car and I'll catch up with your mother for a second, but don't open them until tonight." They happily did as she asked. Presents was a word that had been absent from their vocabulary for a long time. "See, I told you," Alex said to Connor on their way to their grandmother's car. "Optimism always pays off." Yeah, Connor said. Half a dozen wrapped presents with bright bows, each one marked for one of them, were waiting in the front seat of the car. The twins returned inside with their gifts. Their grandmother and their mother were still having a conversation that they most likely weren't supposed to hear. "Things are still tough," Mrs. Bailey said. "Even after selling the bookstore, the house foreclosed and we were having some debts and unpaid things from the funeral, but we're making it somehow. In a few months or so, we'll be back on our feet." Grandma took Mrs. Bailey's hands in her own. "If you need anything, dear, and I do mean anything, you know where to find me," she said. "You've already helped so much," Mrs. Bailey told her. "I don't know where we'd be now if it weren't for you. I could never ask you for anything else." "You're not asking. I'm offering," Grandma assured. The twins knew if they eavesdropped any longer, they'd be caught, so they walked back into the kitchen with their presents. "Well, I have to go back to work," Mrs. Bailey said and kissed both of the twins on top of their heads. "Have a great night, you guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Save some celebration for me." She gathered her things and mouthed a meaningful "thank you" to their grandmother on her way out. Grandma pulled her things away into the guest bedroom and returned to the kitchen, where she found the stacks of bills that Mrs. Bailey had put aside. She plopped the mail into her own purse with a smile, and that was that. Grandma loved helping people, especially if it was against their will. "Let's get started on dinner, shall we?" Grandma said, clapping her hands. Alex and Connor sat at the table and visited with their grandmother while she cooked up a storm. She told them about her recent trips and the difficulty she and her friends experienced getting in and out of places and interesting people she had met along the way. I've never met a person I didn't learn something from," Grandma said. "Even the most monotonous of people will surprise you. Remember that." She was cooking so many different things, it was impossible to tell which ingredients were going where. Everything she did was so fast, and she used almost every pan and dish that they had. With every second that passed, the twins' stomach grew louder and louder. Their mouths were salivating more and more. Finally, after a few hours of aroma-teasing torture, they ate. Alex and Connor had become so accustomed to frozen dinners and takeout that they had forgotten how good food could taste. Their plates were full of mashed potatoes, macaroni and cheese, oven-roasted chicken with carrots and peas and freshly baked rolls. Their kitchen table looked like the cover of a cookbook. Just when they thought they couldn't possibly eat any more, their grandmother pulled out a huge birthday cake from the oven. The twins were amazed. They haven't even realized that she'd been baking one. She sang, "Happy birthday!" and the twins blew out the candles. "Now open your presents," Grandma said. "I've been collecting for you all year." They opened their boxes and they were flooded with knickknacks from all of the countries that their grandmother had been to. Alex was given copies of her favorite books in other languages. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in French, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in German, Little Women in Dutch. Connor got a pile of candies and tacky t-shirts that said things like, "My crazy grandma traveled to India and all I got was this lousy t-shirt." They both received several figurines from famous structures like the Eiffel Tower, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and the Taj Mahal. "It's crazy to think that places like this actually exist in the world," Alex said, holding an Eiffel Tower in her hand. "You would be amazed to know what's out there just waiting to be discovered," their grandma said with a smile and a twinkle in her eye. A day with very low expectations turned into one of the best birthdays that they'd ever had. As the night grew later, the visit with their grandmother began to come to a bittersweet end. Since their dad had died, they'd never saw their grandmother for more than a day at a time, and there were always a few months in between the visits. She was always so busy with her travels. "When do you leave?" Alex asked their grandmother. "Tomorrow," she said, "as soon as I take you to school." The twins' posture sank a bit. "What's the matter?" their grandmother asked, sensing their spirits sink. "We just wish you could stay longer, Grandma, that's all," Connor said. "We really miss you when you're gone," Alex added. "Things are so gloomy here without Dad, but you make everything seem like it's going to be okay." Their grandmother's constant smile faded slightly, and her gaze drifted off towards the window. She stared blankly into the night sky and took a deep breath. "Oh, kiddos, if I could spend every day with you, I would," Grandma said longingly, perhaps more disheartened than she intended to show. "But sometimes life hands us certain responsibilities, not because we want them, but because we're meant to have them, and it's our duty to see to them. All I can think about is how much I miss you two and your dad when I'm away." It was hard for Alex and Connor to understand. Did she not want to travel as much as she did? Their grandmother looked back at them. Her eyes were bright with a new idea. "I almost forgot. I have one more gift for you," Grandma said, and jumped up and skipped to the next room. She returned carrying a large old book with dark emerald cover that said, "The Land of Stories" in gold writing. Alex and Connor knew what the book was as soon as they saw it. If their childhood could be symbolized by one object, it was this book. "It's your old storybook," Alex proclaimed. "I haven't seen that in years." Their grandmother nodded. "It's a very old, and it's been with our family for a long time," Grandma told them. "I take it with me everywhere I go, and I read it to the children in other countries. But I want you two to have it now." The twins were shocked by the gesture. "What?" Connor asked. "We can't take your book, Grandma. That's the Land of Stories. It's your book. It's always been so important to you." Their grandmother opened the book and flipped through the pages, the entire room filled with its musty, papery aroma. "That's very true," Grandma said. "This book and I have spent a lot of time together over the years, but the best of times were when I read it to you, so I'd like to pass it down to you now. I don't need it anymore. I have all the stories memorized anyway." She handed it to them. Alex hesitated, but finally accepted the book from her grandmother. It didn't feel right to take it. It was like receiving an heirloom from a relative who was still alive. "Whenever you're feeling down, on the days that you miss your dad the most, or when you wish that I were here, all you have to do is open it up and we'll all be together in spirit, reading along," Grandma told them. "Now it's getting late and you two have school tomorrow. Let's get ready for bed." They did as she asked, even though they were too old for it. Their grandmother insisted on tucking them into bed like old times. Alex took the Land of Stories with her to bed that night. She gently flipped through the old pages, being careful not to tear them. Seeing all the colorful illustrations of places and characters made her feel like she was reading an old scrapbook of sorts. She loved spending time reading about fairy tale characters more than anything. They'd always been so real and accessible to her. They were the best of friends that she'd ever had. "I wish I'd got to choose which world we lived in," Alex said, running her fingers over the illustrations. They were just so inviting. In her hand was a world unlike the one she lived in. It was a world unaltered by political corruption or technology, or it was a world where good things came to good people, a world where she wanted to be a part of it with all of her being. Alex imagined what it would be like to be a character in her own fairy tale. The forest she'd run through, the castle she'd lived in, the creatures that she'd befriend. Eventually, Alex's eyelids began to feel heavy. She closed the Land of Stories and placed it on her nightstand. She clicked off her lamp and began to drift off to sleep. She was just about to fade into unconsciousness when she heard a funny noise. A low humming sound filled the room. "What in the world?" Alex said to herself and opened her eyes to see what it was. She saw nothing. "That's strange," she said. She closed her eyes once more and began drifting back to sleep. The humming noise began to buzz through the room again. Alex sat up and looked around her room and finally found what was making the noise. It was coming from inside the Land of Stories book on her nightstand, and to her amazement, the pages were unmistakably glowing. What a time to have to stop. Oh my gosh, I don't want to stop, but I have to take Zoe to class. This is so good. Oh my God, I love this so much. This is such a good book, y'all. This is getting really good. This is magical in the best way. You know, there's something really interesting that I found in some of the books that we're reading. There's something very healing about reading children's book. This is The Land of Stories, the first book in the series. I don't know, I feel like without book club, at least, I don't know about the rest of you, never would have picked up these more childish books and I don't say childish in a bad way, like The Land of Stories or the Stepsisters book. I probably wouldn't have picked those up to read on my own, but something keeps telling me to pick them up for book club, and it ends up being very healing for me, and I hope for you all as well, to be going back and experiencing these things. I would have died for this book when I was a kid. I really wish that something like this would have existed. Same, I ever thought about it. Yeah. It's really beautiful. It's really, really beautiful so far. So I hope you're all getting as much as I am out of this. With that being said, I'm going to go take a 2-year-old to ballet covered in fake tattoos of Peppa Pig. So she's going to look like a hardened criminal instead of a baby ballet dancer. But Aunt Sasha's going to take her to dance because mommy's too pregnant. So that's what's going on. See y'all later. I'll be on either this afternoon or tonight for Roll for Slime if anyone wants to join me. If I do it this afternoon, it'll probably be around 1 p.m. And if I do it tonight, it'll be around 6 p.m. So I'll see y'all later. Bye, guys.